ングを開始いたします。Okay, let's get started. I have started the recording. Thank you very much, Florian-san, for joining us for this webinar. Uh, the GET Fund, which Florian-san leads, is a leading European Article 9 venture fund, especially in the clean tech solutions. And I heard that you've have been doing a lot of very high, the quite record breaking venture activities. So we are very glad. Oh, then also like your fund is experiencing quite high IRR, which is around like 22%, which I think you will be touching in your presentation. We are very curious to know what you do, and then I'm very glad to have you for this webinar. Thank you. So Florian-san, could you please start presentation?
ありがとう。皆さん、フローリアンです。と申します。Unfortunately, my Japanese is not yet good enough to hold a presentation in Japanese, maybe in the future. So please bear with me in presenting in English. Yeah, I'm very happy that you all took the time to join this presentation on how we are looking to drive the eco-industrial revolution at the Green European Tech Fund. To give you a quick introduction on who we are and where we come from, maybe one slide on kind of the key points that differentiates us at the GET Fund. So first of all, we've been investing in clean tech and looking to have an environmental impact since over 15 years. So we are one of the oldest and most established funds in Europe investing in clean tech solutions. And not only do we invest in clean tech, but as an investor, of course, you also need to show financial returns. And we're very proud that in the past 5 years, we've achieved over exits with an aggregate value of over 1 billion euros. And we have a positive financial return for our investors, and for the fund that we're currently raising, we project a 22% net IRR, so net return after costs. The way we achieve this is basically by combining our business model first approach. So we see technology as a means to an end that needs to be encapsulated in the correct business model on the one hand. And on the other hand, we are convinced that not only to drive financial returns, but also to have a positive environmental impact, we need to look at those business models holistically with a value creating framework, and indeed identify the impact as competitive advantage to help us earn more money. And this is basically the approach that I would like to discuss with you today on the following slides. So before I dive into the topic, maybe some information of who is backing us at the GET Fund. And we have a very unique set of corporate investors on the one hand side, and financial institutional investors on the other hand. And this is also important for us because indeed we leverage the know-how of our corporate LPs by conducting strategic workshops. And I'll be discussing with the Japanese company Asahi Kasei, who we are very proud of, that they're backing us this week in Tokyo. Have some workshops on this, so it's a really interactive discussion. And of course, we also have some financial institutions. Probably BNP Paribas is the best known in that, and the European Investment Fund, who's backing us with a 60 million euro anchor ticket. And yeah, if you're interested in the strategic part, please do not hesitate contacting me after this talk. Happy to set up a one-on-one meeting in Tokyo, or do a video follow-up call, as you please. So before now I talk about how we work with the startups, a quick introduction on our background in ESG and impact investing. And as I mentioned, we've been doing this for a very long time, and indeed we've been one of the first funds in Europe to set up an ESG reporting, which we did in 2013. We've always been a bit frustrated with the ESG reporting because it is a backward-looking tool, which helps you to mitigate some of the risks. So it is indeed important, but because we invest in high-growth startups, the backward-looking nature makes it very difficult to work with, because a startup is more focused on the future, and it's very difficult to take KPIs from the past and translate them into the future, because it's an exponential growth that we're looking to achieve. Because of that frustration, we tried to kind of focus more and hone it more down, and then started to also incorporate the SDGs in our reporting, right? So instead of just doing the things right, compliance, we started to focus on the right things, right? Focusing the strategy of our startups more on the right things, but still backward looking. And we, over the time, we're more and more convinced we needed a different framework, something that is more strategic and forward looking, to really help us implement impact as a competitive advantage in the business model, to also break up the perceived trade-off that many people still have in their mind, is either you do good ESG investments or you have financial returns. People, I believe also in Japan, to a large extent, still perceive this as a trade-off. And the triple top line framework is meant to break this up and use impact as value creation, a holistic value creation tool, which I'm going to explain to you in more detail in the next slides. And we've used the triple top line as the core to become an Article 9 fund according to EU regulation. I don't know how much you are familiar with EU regulation, so maybe just a word on Article 9. Basically, it is the highest quality you can achieve as an investment product, by really focusing on not just financial returns, but also on quantifiable positive impact on environmental and or social KPIs. So our journey basically is going from doing the things right to doing the right things right. And this is what I'm going to explain to you now. So the triple top line framework was originally developed by Michael Braungart and Professor McDonough as a tool for holistic product development. And in our journey to identify a forward-looking strategic tool for business model development, we quickly identified the triple top line as the right tool, because product development is, of course, an integral part of business development. And with a few modifications, we could really make the triple top line framework match our needs as a fund, as a strategic tool on the one hand side, but also as a tool for reporting. And of course, we're in touch with Professor Braungart, who was very excited to see the tool employed in such a way, and as a concrete value creating tool. So what is the triple top line, and why do we like it so much? First of all, it is a framework that addresses holistically all important dimensions that you need to consider in business model or product development. First and foremost, of course, it's the economic dimension. How do you make money with it? And how do you get financial returns as an investor out of it? The second dimension is the ecological aspect. What is the impact in our environment on the ecosystems with our business model? And of course, very important is, what is the impact on society with our business model? And only if you really consider all three as equal parts of your strategy, you can really have a fast-growing, long-lasting business model. And basically, we break up the areas between all those three dimensions into fractals with different weightings. And I will give you a concrete example on that in the next slides. And then from those fractals, we derive KPIs that are really meaningful for the business model, and also help to drive competitiveness in the business model. Before we go into the use of the triple top line, I would like to explain to you that we, break up this trade-off that I described between impact and financial returns. So it's not a one-dimensional problem that we're looking at, but actually it's more a two-dimensional problem that we're looking at. And we view the impact and ESG criteria as a quality filter for our investments. So first of all, we have the first quality filter is, of course, the financial returns. So only startups and companies with a high financial return profile make it through the first filter, which means we look at this universe. And then the second quality filter is actually we look at startups that meet our ESG and impact criteria. So we filter out the quadrant down here. And basically what it does, it enriches the quality of the companies that you're looking at. And we're convinced that with this fund generation, we'll be able to show that indeed by investing in those businesses, we'll be able to get superior financial returns just because that companies that have an attractive financial return and solve issues on the environmental and social side, they will command a premium. And if you just look at it from the investment perspective, you can also rationalize that by, for example, looking at the terminal value. If you, on the one hand, invest in an oil and gas asset with a relatively short terminal lifetime and compare that to a business with an indefinite terminal life because you actually solve environmental problems and you're not bound by boundaries in the ecosystem, it's very easy to rationalize that the higher terminal value will command a higher premium in the case of an exit. So we are convinced by combining those two, actually, we will drive superior financial returns for our investors. So how do we select businesses, right? Because in the past, this financial return perspective was very difficult for clean tech investing. In the past, people have lost a lot of money in that. And so now I would describe to you how we have shaped our investment strategy in a way that we actually can get good financial returns. And then I will talk about the impact aspect of it as well. So before explaining where we invest, I would like to explain to you where we do not invest. And this is what we call clean tech hardware project businesses. We do not invest in clean tech hardware project businesses because from a venture capital fund perspective, they have a very unlucky combination of risks, which make it very difficult to have a repeatable investment strategy to get good financial outcomes. And those risks are, of course, the project risk that you have, the technology risk, the financing risk, the execution risk. And this combination, we looked at it and we couldn't really find a good solution for this. Why do I mention it? Because I think it's very important to understand if you do impact investing, be very careful to choose a singular KPI like CO2 reduction as your main driver of selecting businesses, because you will naturally gravitate towards those project-based business models because in a life cycle assessment in an Excel spreadsheet, you can calculate high potential CO2 savings. The problem is the probability of scaling those business models is very low. So in reality, you will not only have low financial returns, but also you will have low realized impact. So be very careful when selecting investments only based on one KPI, but we are really convinced you need to look at them holistically, like in a tool with a triple top line. So what do we do instead? Instead, we focus on hardware product business models. So a hardware product is already much lower risk because it is much more scalable, less capital intensive. But per se, also hardware products are not enough to show the venture type of returns. So we see the hardware as the foundation, as the Trojan horse to get customer ownership. So if I sell a piece of hardware to you, I lay the foundation of a customer interaction, customer ownership. And now our idea is how do we leverage that customer ownership by implementing software-based as a service business models, put them on top of the hardware layer. And this is what we call digitized clean tech solutions, which both have high impact potential and high financial returns. Okay, this is the theory. Now I'm going to show you an example, and then we can discuss maybe later in the Q&A session around that example because it makes it a bit more easy to understand. So Vamo is actually the first investment that we did from our new fund, which had the closing at 100 million. And Vamo is a heat pump installer. So in Germany, the majority of the heating systems is based on oil and gas. So there is a high need to decarbonize the heating sector because it produces a lot of CO2. It is also very inefficient. An obvious solution from a technical perspective is by installing the heat pump. So heating the system with electricity and getting 3 or 4 kilowatt hours of heat out of 1 kilowatt hour of electrical power input. So it's a very efficient system. Vamo is a very young company. They're very young on the market. They started commercializing last year. So they did about 1 million euros in revenue, and they will do about 4.5 to 5 million euros this year. And this is already one of the important quality filters that we also have from an investment perspective. Do we have actually product market fit? So is the company able to sell product to the customers, which means we need to see about 1.5 to 2 million euros in revenue before we consider an investment. And Vamo checks that box. And additionally, they're growing quite aggressively. So the idea now is by selling a hardware heat pump system to the customer, to the end customer, Vamo has now the potential to upsell, on the one hand, service contracts. But the big idea behind this is by having several thousands of installed heat pumps in the field and having full control over each heat pump, we can now start building ancillary grid services, energy service business models where we help manage the grid provider, balancing the load in the grid, making the grid more resilient. And for the customer, we can also optimize costs because we can procure energy when the electricity price is low, and we can throw off load by using a buffer storage when the electricity price is high. So the Vamo system not only will enable higher penetration of the heat pump system, but also will enable balancing business models which help decrease the CO2 system. And all those will result in attractive margin recurring revenue streams. So it's not just a one-off hardware sale, but instead we have those software-driven as a service business models on top. Yeah, so this is basically our rationale why we invested in Vamo in a nutshell. And yeah, you can really see we're driving from heat pump installation, adding that software layer on top to get to those digitized as a service business models. To be very clear, we do not need to see those as a service business models yet. We need to have a very concrete idea of them. But what we need to see is good traction on the hardware side so that we can really build data-driven hypotheses, how those as a service business models may look like, and how we then can scale the business and create more value also as an investor. So this is kind of our VC game plan, if you will. So now I will give you one example on the triple top line, and Yuka, you will give me a sign if I'm running out of time. I hope I'm still good on time. So this is how the complete triple top line is looking like, right? So I mentioned that we have the 9 fractals. So at the top, we have the focus on economy and economy only, which for us, the most important KPI as an investor is really the growth of the business. Are we growing fast enough? That's a very important KPI. And then we can work our way down economy ecology. So we have a KPI that is still important for the economy, but has an ecological aspect. And we've chosen the coefficient of performance. So it's basically the efficiency of which the heat pump is converting electrical power into heat. I mentioned that can be anywhere between one unit of electricity and 3 to 4 units of heat. And this is, of course, very important for the consumer because the higher the COP coefficient, the better the system economically is for the consumer. And the easier it is for Vamo to sell those systems to the customer, right? By having a high COP, we will help drive revenue. So a high COP will help us drive revenue. And why is it important for the environment? Well, a high COP will reduce in a lower energy consumption and a lower CO2 footprint. So the next KPI is weighting even more towards the ecology. And we have included that we want to optimize not just heat pumps that have been installed by Vamo, but also we want to onboard heat pumps that have been installed by third-party installers. to help increase the COP, right? So the Vamos software will help dynamically improve the COP. And of course, this will dramatically improve our environmental footprint. It will help dramatically reduce the CO2, but also it will help us make more money because improving the COP is a service that the customer will be willing to pay for. So on the one hand, we reduce CO2, and on the other hand, that CO2 reduction will help us make more money. This is basically the way we think about those. And then, yeah, I already mentioned it. Ultimately, all those environmental KPIs fall down into the CO2 reduction. But for us, it's important. It's not just the CO2 reduction, but really how the CO2 reduction is anchored in the business model and how we can track other KPIs that are directly relating to the performance of the business model and the economic performance of the business. And I will now not go through all 9 KPIs because I think it's important to really for you to understand the mechanic of this, and I would rather save some more time on the discussion part. So this is basically how we marry financial returns and impact and really hope to drive value as an impact investor and still have a meaningful reporting for our investors. A quick snapshot on the Green European Tech Fund. As I mentioned, we've now achieved the first closing with 100 million euros. High-profile LPs have committed capital to the fund. Asahi Kasei is our first Japanese LP. There's some very interesting advanced discussions with other Japanese LPs, and yeah, I would be very proud if we could onboard more Japanese institutional and corporate investors into our fund. We expect the final closing to happen in May 2025 with a hard cap of 250 million euros. Our portfolio will be 15 to 20 startups, and we'll invest 5 to 15 million per company. The management fee, which is not on this slide, is actually 2% annually, and it will go down dramatically after the investment period by 0.15% annually, and it has a hard cap of a cumulative 17.75%. So very attractive returns, very attractive terms for our LPs. And also something that I wanted to mention actually on the previous slide is that we do take those KPIs very seriously, and as a sign that we take those seriously, we have bound 30% of our carried interest to achieving 1 or 3 KPIs. So we will set those KPIs, company and business model specific, together with our investor advisory board. We will choose 1 or 3 of those KPIs. Most of the times it will probably be 3. Set targets for those KPIs, and then our impact carry, 30% of our overall carry will be bound to those KPIs. So we have a very strong financial commitment to achieve those. And yeah, last but not least, I'll be holding, together with a Japanese partner, Yoshiko Saito, several roundtables and discussions around this, to which you're cordially invited. I've shown it on this slide in Japanese. And yeah, I'm now looking forward to hopefully many discussions.
Great, Florian-san. Thank you very much for your very comprehensive and very interesting presentation. I would like to move on to the question and answer session. And if there is any questions from the floor, please do not hesitate to let me know either by through chat, or just raising the hand raise button. And meanwhile, I myself have several questions, so maybe I'll just get started. Can you go back to the KPI slide?
Yes.
Oh, great. Thank you. The framework of economy, ecology, equality, that looks really interesting and impressive to really balance those three dimensions. And my first question is that this is more KPI specific to a particular company, right?
Yes.
And when you do you set the KPI as a portfolio, like a fund level, or like, well, there's a lot of discussion in Japanese market. Okay, so defining KPIs to each company itself is quite it may not be difficult, but it's kind of time-taking, labor-intensive process. But summarizing the impact as a fund, adding up those impact might not
Yes.
make sense. And then how would you deal with that question, those
Yep.
question? Yeah, the
Okay.
fund level KPI.
Yeah, so thank you. So I think there's 3 questions, which I would, oh, sorry, there is a, sorry, there was a hotel phone ringing. Apologies for that. So there's 3 questions, I think, in what you've said, which I would like to unpack. So the first of all, is it time consuming to do this on a company specific level? And actually my answer would be no, because we only choose KPIs that are meaningful for us as an investor anyways, right? So we're not doing work that we wouldn't do otherwise already, because we're really focusing on KPIs that are important to understand the business model, and it focuses on key drivers of the business model. So those KPIs will be tracked by the business in any case. So there's no additional time in that. From our perspective. And so the other question was, okay, does it make sense to set a KPI on the fund level, kind of a target? And I understand why it makes sense and it's easy to explain. On the other hand, from our experience, I would highly recommend to not do that, because by setting a CO2 reduction target for your fund, really what happens is you will be drawn to those difficult to scale business models, because you will be overweighting that CO2 reduction target, right? So say you have a fixed number of the CO2 reduction target, and you have a portfolio target of 20 companies. So then you automatically screen out businesses where the reduction is below whatever number you have divided by 20. And that really will result in funds investing in those difficult to scale business models, which will result in low financial returns, and which will result in the analysis impact investing does not work. Well, if you do it the wrong way, it doesn't. But instead, if you're flexible and set company-specific business targets, so targets that really focus on the business model, then you can actually drive financial return. You can become more successful financially. And of course, you can still aggregate CO2 saving on the fund level, right? So we try to find KPIs, of course, that we can also aggregate on the fund level. And most likely CO2 will be a KPI that we report on for our companies. But there may be also secondary KPIs that maybe only 5 of our portfolio companies will have to report on. And we really believe that this is the right way to do it, to look at it holistically and business model specifically, because the world is complex and you cannot just aggregate everything into one number.
That's so interesting, because the discussion and debate around this topic in Japan is like, well, you'd have to have like a fund level KPI, and then the next question is how, and then the discussion seems to be stuck on that point. So that's quite interesting to know that.
Yeah, we went through a similar journey, right? So we also came from that thinking and then realized it just doesn't work well.
Thank you. ご参加されている方からご質問、ぜひお願いできればと思いますが、もし日本語であれば、私が、拙い訳をいたしますけれども、何かございますでしょうか。The audience seems a bit shy, so I'll comment and do that. Okay. There is a question from Hase-san from Japan Institute. Your fund is a green tech, but does the adaptation of climate change and the biodiversity included in your fund strategy?
Yes. So biodiversity could be a viable ecological KPI. In the case of WAMO, it does not impact the biodiversity positively or negatively. So we've not included it. And instead, we focused on CO2 reduction. But the same logic may also be used for biodiversity or other environmental KPIs.
これは、どうぞどうぞ。
ありがとうございます。その生物多様性とかバイオダイバーシティで、有望なスタートアップっていうのが、なかなか日本では見つかりにくいんですけれども、欧州の方ではいらっしゃるのかとか、そのあたりをちょっとお伺いできればと思いました。
Well, in Japan, the high potential venture in the area of biodiversity, and then the 生物多様性と、あと何でしたっけ？ごめんなさい。
気候変動の適用。
climate change. It seems the number of the high potential ventures are quite low, seems to be quite low in Japanese market. And then we will be able to find enough potential investee in your market?
Yes, that's a very good question. And as I said, we've been doing this since 15 years now. And the ecosystem took some time to evolve over time, of course. And with our successful exits, we could also show to the market that indeed you can earn money with it, which also helps to accelerate. So I think for it to really take off, you also need some success cases in the geographic market where you're active. And to give you some numbers, we are looking at, of course, way over 1,000 companies in our deal flow. And of those over 1,000 companies, we have about 750 relevant companies that we screen. And also to be clear, we focus on Europe. So it's a pan-European fund, and we can invest all over Europe.
なんか、15年やってるから、たくさんあるっていう回答だったかなと思います。
そうですか。なんかその生物多様性のどういう分野でそういうスタートアップがたくさんいらっしゃるのかと。
どうぞと。
いや、それをまずは、はい、ちょっとお伺いできればと思いました。
She's quite curious about the biodiversity area. So what kind of a sub-sector of biodiversity you find a lot of potential ventures? That's her first question.
Yeah, biodiversity is actually a tough question. So far, we haven't looked at a lot of companies where biodiversity is a key driver for the business model. It's, I think, something that is relatively new, and we are open to businesses where this is the case. But unfortunately, I cannot give you a concrete example from the last 6 months from our deal flow where biodiversity would be a key driver. Maybe a secondary effect could be something that we're looking at right now quite intensively, is a digital reporting and tracking tool to make your supply chain transparent. So this may be something where biodiversity would be a secondary driver of the business. Very concretely, we're looking at the business that is offering this transparent supply chain for the textile industry. So they're really going through all the suppliers, also in China, sometimes 6, 7 levels deep, right? So supplier and under suppliers, they go quite deep. And there, of course, it plays an important role, for example, where the cotton comes from, how the cotton was grown, and where this will also have an impact of biodiversity. but the main driver is, of course, not biodiversity. It's a sub sector of this.
なんか、そのものズバリじゃないけれども、そのデジタルトラッキングみたいな、そのライヤーをこう、どんどんこう、レイヤーを入れて、何でしたっけ、コットンっておっしゃってた、テクスタイルインダストリーでっていうのはちょっとおっしゃってたかなと思います。はい。
あ、そうですね。やっぱりそういうデジタル技術みたいなところですかね。そのサプライチェーンを見える化するためのっていうところですかね。
そういうことですね。
はい、ありがとうございます。
ありがとう。
Okay, there's another question from Sumitomo Mitsui Trust Bank, Mr. Yano. Are you also investing in areas of CCS? It's a SAF and アンモニアってなんて言うんでしたっけ？アンモニア。
Yeah, or hydrogen. Very good question. And the answer is yes and no. No, with regards to the project business models, which is something that I mentioned earlier, right? So I think those are very good examples of CapEx heavy, high technology risk, difficult to scale business models, which look attractive from an impact perspective, right? Because they solve big problems. So we wouldn't invest in businesses that want to build those infrastructure type projects. I think a venture capital fund is fundamentally not the right vehicle to express that. I think corporates and maybe infrastructure investment funds are more prone to that. However, we would look in businesses where you can drive those technologies by not having to do those heavy CapEx investments. And there is a business in Germany, for example, it's called Carbon One. They focus on converting hydrogen and CO2 to methanol, which you can use as a sustainable fuel in shipping or any other industry, basically. And they've basically developed a catalyst for a very efficient chemical transformation. So their business model would be more around licensing and selling of the catalyst. And basically you can use off-the-shelf steel tanks and equipment that is standard in the chemical industry. We have not invested in that business, but I wanted to give an example of a business model that we would consider because it is asset light and you have the potential for recurring revenue streams.
Okay, great. Thank you. 最初のところのご質問に関しては、設備投資が大きいものについては自分たちの投資対象ビジネスモデルではないというところで、自分たちはベンチャー、キャピタルの、ビジネスモデルと合わないというところでやってらっしゃらないというところなんですけれども、すいません。私はあまり科学ができないので、多分水素と何かを変えて、別の物質を作るとかっていう、その、触媒にするというような、例えば技術をライセンスで売るとかですね。まだやってないけれども、なんかそういったことについては、可能性はあるというふうにおっしゃっておられたかと思います。And sorry, the following question from also Mr. Yano is that, do you have any, like specific areas that you see high potential, like you'd like to focus on, like from now on?
Yes, that's an excellent question. So the way we identify the areas to invest in is actually what we do together also with our corporate investors. We do so-called deep dives. So we try to identify big topics that we cannot avoid in the next 5 to 10 years. So where we're 100% sure in those areas we will, as a society and in the value chain, change is going to happen. And whenever change is happening, then we can invest. And I don't know, maybe you want to translate and then I can take it from there.
OK。なんかこの、金融機関ではなくて、いわゆる事業者からの、投資というのも受けているので、彼らと一緒に、5から10の大きなトピックを決めて、この10年で非常に大きな変化が起きるであろうという分野を決めて、そこに対して投資をしていくというようなことをやっておられるそうです。OK。
And to give you concrete examples of area deep dives that we've done, one of them is, for example, the heating sector, which I mentioned, where we analyzed the value chain and the technologies along the value chain and the type of business models. And then we try to identify what is the most attractive position for us as a fund, financially and from an impact perspective. Where do we want to be positioned in that value chain? And then we invested in Vamo based on that
うー
analysis.
ん。なんかエクザンプル、事例としては、ヒーティングですね、暖房システムということだと思いますけれども、そこについてはやっぱりディープダイブとして、分析をして、どこが一番非常に効率的に自分たちが、ポジションできるっておっしゃってましたけど、そこを見つけて、で、結果として先ほどのバモという、ベンチャーに投資をしたということで、そもそもヒーティングっていうのは、とても、注目されていた、一つのエリアだったっていうことのようです。
Another good example would be the battery space. So we did and are still doing a deep dive on the battery space, also leveraging the know-how of our LPs, Scheffler and Asahi Kasei, for example, who have in-depth knowledge, of course, of the technology and the market. And very specifically, we analyze the battery recycling value chain at the moment. And I'll let you translate. And
あ、 もう一個の、事例としてはバッテリーですね。電池の領域で、今ここに出てるシャーフラーと、あと旭化成さん、の、知見を活用して、そこを非常に分析をして、特に今はバッテリーのリサイクルのところについて研究をしているということです。
So in the case of battery, for example, we really did a breakdown of the technologies on the cell level in the beginning. Then what kind of applications are there? What happens when the end of life application, kind of the secondary battery market, and then the recycling market. And then the question for us was, where in the recycling space do we want to be positioned? Right? Where do we find business models that follow our logic of being capital light and enabling as a service business models? And very specifically, we've now identified a company that on the one hand has a software analytic solution to analyze end-of-life batteries. And on the other hand, they have a marketplace to bring together different players in different places of the industry to sell end-of-life batteries and also recycled materials.
What do you mean by the end-of-life battery?
For example, in the automotive space, the battery has a certain number of charging cycles you can do. And then after a certain cycle time, the battery is no longer good enough as a car battery, but you can still use it in stationary storage.
OK, OK, OK. なんかこのバッテリーの、すいません、私、専門ではないので間違ってるかもしれないですけど、製造からパッケージングから、元々の用途で、企画されている、エンドオブライフっていうところまでのところが、さらにリサイクルされた場合の使い方っていうことで、バリューチェーンを研究した後に、今、ちょうど投影されている、このグリーンのところですね。設備投資金があまりなくて、非常にスケールしやすいような、モデルになるような、ものはないかという目で探していくと。それで、その先ほどのそのエンドオブライフバッテリー、何らかの企画にも、抵触して、それ以上その目的には使えないけれども、他に使えるというものについて、どうやって使っていくかっていうようなことを、これ多分ソフトウェアじゃないかと思うんですけれども、分析をして、市場を組み合わせていくような、ベンチャーに今ちょっと着目をしているというようなことをおっしゃっていました。はい。矢野さん大丈夫でしょうか？
水島新大矢野でございます。はい、翻訳いただきまして、はい、ありがとうございました。大変クリアです。ただ、ちょっとごめんなさい。また別の質問になってしまうんですけれども、
もちろんです。はい。
ごめんなさい。前半、ご質問されてたですね、ファンドとしての KPI があるのかどうかっていったところは、
はい、
ごめんなさい。うまく聞き取れなかった ところがあったなと思いました。今の話聞いてたEV バッテリーですとか、ヒートポンプとかやられていて、かなり KPI も、バラバラになってくるんじゃないかなっていうのは私も感じたところですので、そうですね。ファンドとして何か共通の KPI があるかどうかといったところをすいません、お伺いできればと思います。
はい。それは先ほどのお答えではですね、ないというふうにおっしゃってて、で、なんていうの、それぞれ積み上げてアグリゲートのことをやっていくんだけれども、そしてその CO2 っていうのはやっぱり、多くの投資先には出てくるので、それ自体はこう上がってくるんだけれども、そうじゃない KPI のようなものもこう多少積み上げて出していく。ただファンドとして、何かを目標にするっていうことにすると、これは面白い話だなと思ったんですけど、先ほどの、ベンチャー投資としてのビジネスモデルで、設備投資が軽いような、こうスケーラブルなビジネスに対してやっていくのではなくて、よりこう、プロダクトの方に寄っていってしまうという経験を過去したので、自分たちはそのファンドとしての KPI をこう最初から置くってことはしないんだっていうことはおっしゃってました。非常に私も面白い、見方だなというふうに思っておりました。
はい、すみません。聞き漏らしていたところもご解説いただきまして、はい。ありがとうございます。
ありがとうございます。
私の方で、はい、クリアでございます。ありがとうございました。Thank you very much.
ありがとう。
何か他にご質問とかございますか？So there is another question that popped up to my mind is that, well, the impact investing community these days, particularly in like a Gene and GSG, what now they're sort of advocating is that that the fund has to have like a theory of change as a financial institution. And like a Jane is, I feel like a Jane is quite keen on emphasizing that without having a theory of change, it's not like impact investing. That's what, like, to me, that sounds like what they are saying. And also, the term system investment, system level, the terms such as systemic risk, system level investing, system level impact, those words are all of a sudden sort of coming up in the impact community. And when I heard from your presentation, when you say, okay, so you focus on like battery, like a life cycle from the production to the recycling, that seems to be one example of sort of systemic change impact investing. But what's your view on this theory of change emphasis, and also like a system change emphasis?
Yeah, thank you. Of course, I think this is exactly also our thinking as a fund. We already mentioned what we want to change in the system of the financial industry is we want to change this perceived trade-off, return or impact, and instead we want to look at it holistically, and we want to show that indeed we can get superior financial returns by doing it the way we're doing it, right? So that's kind of the change that we want to achieve in the financial sector. And then, yeah, as I mentioned, on each level and each portfolio company, we have a unique, if you will, theory of change. It starts with the choosing the sector, kind of the deep dive aspect that I mentioned. Of course, we have a huge part of it. Why we should look at it is how does that area impact the environment, right? So it's one of our key quality filters. And then from there we go from the macro, we go into the micro, and then really try to understand how does this company affect the environmental impact of that sector, as in the case of Vamo. why do we believe is WAMO driving the change from gas heating to electric heating? And ultimately, how does that positively impact the CO2? So what we did, I cannot find the slides right now on my computer here, but what we did in the due diligence of the EIF, and I'm happy to do a follow-up on that, on the theory of change part. The EIF invested 60 million euros, and for them, the whole theory of change cohesiveness was a key aspect. And they were super happy with the way we think about it, and they're also considering of implementing the triple top line for their reporting going forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much. 何かご質問は、私ばっかり聞いちゃって申し訳ないんですけれども、何かご質問ございますか？ Well, sort of my final question to you is like, this is the topic that we were discussing before the webinar. So now in the United States, the Trump and red sweep happened, and then it seems like in the United States, this anti-ESG movement will be widespread, at least for the 4 years going on. And what would be the influence of that to European market? And also in Europe, there's this the geographical conflict between the Ukraine and Russia, and then that also adversely affected the environmental friendly movement, that I believe. So what is your view on those geopolitical change in terms of the ESG movement?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question because it does affect us all, does it not? And also, I think when we talk about Europe, indirectly, we're also talking about Japan, because Europe and Japan is very similar in the sense, if you look at it from an energy policy perspective, both areas are importers of energy, right? So both Japan and Europe is importing energy one way or another. After Fukushima, Japan mothballed a lot of the nuclear power plants and it became a huge importer of LNG gas. And of course, everything that's happening on the geopolitical stage right now has a direct impact on the energy security. It's not just what's happening in the US or Ukraine, but also the Middle East, I think, is something that we need to look at from an energy security perspective. And that's one of the reasons I'm in Japan so often. I'm convinced that the solutions that we develop in Europe and in Japan, actually, there should be more interchange, because I think the solutions that are developed in America come from a fundamentally different position and may not be suitable to be used in Japan or Europe. But Japan and Europe, I think there's a lot of common ground on that. So this is not specifically on Trump, but on the geopolitics in general.
Thank you so much.
I don't know if you want to translate that, and then we can.
今私の質問非常にちょっと抽象度が高かったんですけど、トランプで、共和党がこれだけ勝ったということについて、ヨーロッパに対してどういう影響があるかっていうのをご説明いただいたんですけれども、彼の見解では、ヨーロッパと日本っていうのは、両方とも、エネルギーを輸入している国という意味で非常に似通っていると。そういうことで、中東の問題もありますけれども、そのヨーロッパのソリューションっていうのが、非常に日本のマーケットに関係していると自分は思っていて、なので、非常に日本に注目して、こうやって、ファンドレイジングも含めてですね、もう今年3回ぐらい来日されたということみたいなんですけれども、日本、ちょっとアメリカのソリューションとはだいぶ違うはずなので、日本と一緒にやっていきたいということを思っているということでした。 It does not work. It's not a question. It's not but can I just have a look at the slide? ビジネスモデルのところをなんか見せて、リーさん、こちらの、でご覧いただけますでしょうか。
So, shall I walk through that slide again? Or
これただ、見たいということでしょうか。Gloria さん、can you send me the slide so
oh,
that I can send to the people who today
yes.
join? Yeah. 後からですね、このスライド自体は皆さんにお送りしようと思いますので、ちょっとお時間いただければと思います。
Yeah, happy to share the slides. And also I posted my email address into the chat, so everybody is welcome to follow up. And happy to arrange an in-person meeting or a video follow-up call. I'll be in Tokyo until Thursday this week. And then after that, I'll be in Osaka. So in case anybody is living in Osaka or Kansai area, also happy to do that in Kansai.
他に何かご質問なければ、1時間ですが、終了にしようかなと思いますけれども、何かございますか？大丈夫でしょうか？ Okay, then thank you very much, Florian-san. Maybe from the last final comment from you, please.
Yeah, thank you very much for your time. I hope it was interesting. I enjoyed the very good questions, so thank you very much. And if you would like to learn more, as I mentioned, please do follow up. Would be really happy to have an interactive discussion on how we maybe even could collaborate in future between Europe and Japan, and help survive in those uncertain geopolitical environments. I think we need strong partnerships, and I think Japan and Europe definitely have the basis to do that. ありがとうございました。
Thank you so much, Florian-san. To me personally, it's very, very interesting, like a triple framework. It's also interesting, and there are a lot of things that I learned today. Thank you very much, and very looking forward to the next, probably next opportunity to meet you in the future.
お気
では、
に。
これで終わりにしたいと思います。どうもありがとうございました。皆さん大丈夫でしょうか？ありがとうございました。
またね。